Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. Todd White has been a serial entrepreneur and creator since the age of 17. Today, after 15 years in the wine business, his life is dedicated to educating and helping people make better choices about food, nutrition, and how they think about consuming alcohol. He is the founder of Dry Farm Wines. His company has grown over 675x times in revenue since starting in, I think, 2015, making it one of the fastest growing private companies in the US, doing this all without any debt or investors. Todd is a writer, speaker, and a leading authority on healthy, organic, natural wines and the importance of microdosing alcohol for health, longevity, and vitality. He is a self-described biohacker who practices daily meditation, Wim Hof breathing, cold thermogenesis, and is a big believer of the ketogenic diet, at least for himself, daily 22-hour intermittent fasting, and he's a fitness enthusiast. He is also a frequent speaker on topics including ketogenic diet, lifestyle, meditation, company culture, and business performance. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ali. It's super great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about lots of things that are wine and performance.
Excellent. Because look, I like my red wine, and I was super excited when I heard about your company and subscribed straight away. And we get our deliveries on a continuous basis. I think it's every month, and it's just so great that you're out there and you've got this amazing company. But what actually sort of inspired me more than that was your own personal habits around fitness and lifestyle and health. And then also how you bring that into your company culture, which I'd love to get into as well. But maybe we could start with, can you maybe share your personal lifestyle habits around fitness and health and how that helps you run a successful business?
Well, I mean, I think running a successful life then manifests into successful journeys around business or romance or whatever you want to be successful. I don't really like the word successful because it normally connotes kind of financial achievement. But financial achievement, I think, is very different than living a successful life. And so I think it's really important to focus on the components of a successful life. And for me, the foundation of that is a daily meditation practice. And so once we take control and power over the trauma of thinking, right, and we can slow the mind down and find the present moment and the silence that allows us to receive the birthright innocence of abundance that is due all of us. So, we're born innocent, and then we adapt fear. We're taught fear. And this starts to create resistance. And we've got to get that fear creates the trauma of thinking. So I think meditation is the foundation for fitness practices. I have a pretty standard routine. I'm doing high intensity interval training daily, and that will range from 15 to 30 minutes, depending upon whether it's also a resistance training day. I do shorter high intensity intervals on resistance days, just because I want to be able to use my time that is dedicated to fitness more efficiently. So on resistance training, I use a method that's been adapted from several experts, and what I would call minimum effective dose. And this is just what works for me. So I work with really heavy weights and very low reps, typically 3 to 4 reps on 3 to 4 sets on very heavy weights. When I say very heavy weight, I mean about 90% of my 1 rep max. And I'm doing that for 3 to 4 reps and for 3 to 4 sets for each movement. I'm in and out in 30 minutes. on resistance training. And then on the off days when I'm doing high intensity without any resistance training, then I'm out of that in about 30 minutes. In addition to that, I'm doing, of course, stretching and balance work. I think it's really important to focus on particularly as you're aging, on perfecting your balance and really doing a lot of balance therapy. So that's sort of my fitness routine. On nutrition, I'm ketogenic largely. I also only eat once per day. Right now, I'm experimenting with a new fasting schedule, so I'm not eating at all on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then back to my once per day eating on Thursday through Sunday. On the days that I'm not eating during extended fasting, I'm also not drinking wine, and it's a water-only fast.
Wow. And how long have you been doing that one for?
So I just started experimenting with the not eating on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday not this week, but the week before. I'm going to probably do it for a month and see sort of what the outcome is. I'm a huge believer in the benefits of autophagy and which is the cellular kind of regeneration from extended fasting. When I used to do the lean gains fasting method, which is the most common and certainly the easiest to do, which is eating twice a day in a 6-hour window. So I used to eat lunch around 1 or 2, and then I would eat dinner between 6 and 7. I went to once a day, meaning I eat about 6 o'clock every night. It's the only thing I eat during the day. No snacking, no any kind of fat intake, or I occasionally have a cup of coffee. I generally drink green tea and water. But the point I was going to make is when I went from twice a day to once a day, and the once a day is quite a bit more challenging psychologically in the beginning. So fasting is really, particularly for ketogenic, which suppresses hunger, fasting is not really difficult at all. It's emotionally challenging. And so when I went from twice a day to once a day meal, there was about a 4 to 6 week process. I think there was a psychological adjustment to just not eating at all, right? It wasn't that I don't eat now. Even when I eat at night, I don't eat because I'm hungry. I eat because I enjoy it, right? I'm not like compelled to eat. I'm compelled to enjoy wine and to enjoy food. I just happen to love food and I love taste, and I'm, very lucky to be in the taste business. So I'm able to follow my passion as well as my passion for health. But when I went to once a day from twice a day, there was a very significant improvement in my overall wellness and balance of health. So fasting is not right for everybody, but for me, when I went to a once a meal day, it was just like a major step forward I felt in my wellness program.
What were the benefits that you noticed moving to one meal?
Just more energy, less decision fatigue, more time, just a general feeling of well-being. So, and I notice this all the time, even now when I eat at night. So when I eat, you can feel it, like the body slows down. Everything slows down as it goes into digestive mode, right? There's a certain heaviness about it. There's a certain load factor that you feel when you eat. And when you're accustomed to not eating and you're going all day without eating, you notice it when you put food in your body. And the thing is, we're feeling like that all the time when we eat. We just don't really recognize it. Look, most people are using food and eating as a way of escaping the trauma of thought. Same thing they used entertainment for: television, movies, porn, anything that distracts us away from the trauma of thinking. And so eating slows everything down, right? Eating is very distracting away from this trauma of thinking that most of us are engaged in all day long. So that's that reel in our head. This is what meditation helps you to manage, which is, we're constantly caught up in some kind of regret of the past or some anxiety of the future, right? And so once we begin to control that and understand the power of the egoic mind and how to be the gatekeeper, the watchman over this trauma of thinking, then we start to notice and be aware of so many more things around us. And so eating is one of those things.
Mm. That's interesting. And I'm glad that you said, you're not sort of advocating that this is the right thing for everyone, but it just works for you. And I think that's an important point to take. But it's interesting how you've had those effects. And then you've obviously mentioned, your fitness regime. And I actually just wanted to ask you about that. So would you say that you'd end up doing, say, 3 resistance and then 3 HIIT every week? Is that sort of, do you have a day off, or is it every day that you're doing something?
I generally work out every day, but occasionally, because of my travel schedule, every now and again I have a day off. I don't mind taking a day off. I think it's probably good. I'm just a bit addicted to fitness. I like the way it makes me feel. I don't work, I'm quite lean and fortunately have a lot of definition, and I appreciate the cosmetics of that. But that's not why I work out. I work out for mental health. I mean, we know there's a ton of evidence out there showing that particularly high intensity training. I was just reading a Harvard study this morning on high intensity exercise and combined with fasting and the tremendous beneficial brain effects that it has. So we know there's a ton of studies out there showing that same thing with ketogenic diet and its cognitive benefits. But again, whether you're keto, whether you exercise with intensity or not, whether you fast and what regularity or what your fasting schedule is, these things are all individualized. So I think the very best way is to experiment, and you have to give your body and mind enough time to adapt to the experiment. That's the reason my current experiment on this 3-day fasting every week, I'm doing it for a month. But you have to give your body and mind time to adjust to the experiment, right? And then you can decide based on the experimentation, whether or not you think that it's something that you want to continue or experiment further with. I love the proverb for biohacking or nutrition or fasting. I love the proverb, to feel is to understand, right? And so once we feel, we know what is good or not good for us, right? I'll give you an example. I used to take, this ridiculous gargantuan handful of supplements every day. And about 4 years ago, I experimented with, I felt like my body was being stressed from them. And I knew I had really expensive urine for sure, right? And so I stopped taking most all supplements about 4 years ago, and I actually felt better. I felt like my body was under less stress processing all of these supplements, and I've just never returned to taking them again. I take some minerals and some NAD and a handful of things a day, but very, very, very like a fraction, like a tenth of what I used to take. Right.
And that's interesting that you say about the expensive urine, because it's true. A lot of people do actually, the supplements actually do pass through them. I guess if you were to think about taking supplements again, you'd do it in a more systematic way to find out the effects.
Well, I think if I were going to experiment with it again, and I haven't, other than minerals because of my fasting schedule and ketogenic diet, which is so other than some minerals, and NAD, which I recently started experimenting with recently, which is kind of the latest, greatest anti-aging supplement. But if I were going to experiment, I think I would take the approach of kind of reverse elimination diet, right? So I would start adding things very gradually over a long period of time, experimenting with how they made me feel or didn't feel, right? And so again, once we're in touch with our body and the awareness of a clean and clear mind, which is what meditation does for you, we're just more sensitive and aware to feeling, right? And when you clean up your diet, you get off of the dangerous neurotoxin of sugar, and you get off of, highly glycemic foods that are creating blood glucose responses and coordinating insulin, and you get off of processed foods and all the chemicals associated with that, you just feel better, right? Well, once you start to feel both your body and mind, then you're more sensitive to being able to decide what makes you feel better or not. That's the reason I love this proverb. To feel is to understand, right? To understand what's right for you.
Interesting. And then how have you found, how have you felt, I guess, on NAD, and how long have you been experimenting with that?
I've been on it for about 2 months, and I've not noticed any discernible feeling one way or the other. It's reported that you have a high energy, but my energy is already very high. I haven't noticed any increase in energy at all. I haven't noticed any impact whatsoever in terms of the way I feel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there seems to be a fair bit of sort of scientific studies on it now and that sort of thing. I guess maybe are you going to continue for a bit longer to find out what potential sort of long-term effects it might have?
Well, here was my approach with it. Now, I take any sort of chemical alteration very seriously, but my approach with it is that we don't really know, according to the research. We know that NAD decreases and with age for sure. There's some suggestion scientifically. We don't really have a control group study on it. There's no way to say that definitively that it works. We just don't have that evidence at the moment. May not get it for quite some time, but for people I follow and respect, there doesn't appear to be any negative side effects associated with it. And it's very likely that there's some anti-aging benefit, but that's likely at this point. We don't really know, but certainly some of the folks that I follow and respect, I think thought leaders, are using it, and the leading researchers around it, not only the people who are promoting it and doing podcasts around it and promoting the product, but I'm talking about independent researchers who are not product affiliated, right? Because there's I think there's a significant difference when we hear a podcast promoting the use of it. We need to understand who's promoting it, and why, right? And so, because I take all that with a grain of salt, to metaphorically, right? So it's I want to hear from independent researchers who have no product affiliation, right? Who are doing anti-aging research. And so that's sort of how I decided to I bought a year subscription to it. As you know, there are two primary producers. And so I haven't had any positive or negative feelings about it one way or the other. I'm just continuing. I'm going to supplement with it for a year and kind of step back and think about it again. But the main thing was there doesn't appear to be any downside to using it so far.
Interesting. Well, we'll check in with you in a couple of months. But so you've mentioned meditation and diet and fitness. And then would there be anything else on a daily, a daily practice that you would incorporate, like breathing? I know you've done some Wim Hof breathing. Is that a daily habit for you?
It's a daily practice. I begin my meditation practice, which lasts about 40 minutes. The first one, I do two meditations. I have my private meditation in the morning at home, which with breath work lasts about 12 to 16 minutes. And then following is a concentrated meditation. And then I have kind of a gratitude session, and I do daily affirmations and visualizations at the end of my meditation practice. So yes, I begin every meditation practice with intense breath work, and I recommend it particularly for people who are just beginning meditation, because the primary challenge with a beginner in meditation, and the reason most people quit or don't feel like they are successful, is that they say that they can't stop thinking. Well, this is natural. Everybody starts meditation trying to learn to quiet the mind, but it's called a practice for a reason. It takes quite some time in your practice before you begin to experience meaningful control over the silence of the mind. So it doesn't happen like instantly. But here's the reason breath work, I think, is super useful for beginning a meditation practice, and particularly for beginners. But when you're engaged in heavy breath work and breath holds, you can't think about anything, right? You're thinking about breath, and you're thinking about the act of breathing, right? And so it's very difficult to have much else going on in your mind. So I think it's a great way to start meditation. I would say further, the other biohack that I use daily that I think is super, super important is cold thermogenesis in the way of a cold shower. I live out in the country, so I have well water. It's very cold. Depends on where you live as to how cold your water is going to get. But for me, it's just like a jolt to the central nervous system. And when I say cold shower, I'm talking about stepping into a cold stream and getting out cold. So there's no hot water at all in that part of my morning routine. Now, after I go to the gym or work out, then I take a hot shower and, warm shower or whatever with soap or whatever. I take a normal shower. But when I do my cold therapy in the morning, it's cold in and cold out. And I think that's an important distinction. Now, if you're just starting cold showers, you may want to work into that. But I think it's very different in terms of the impact it's going to have on your autonomic processes and your central nervous system. It's very shocking to step into the cold stream and then step out without ever going to warm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And do you do that all throughout winter as well? Not that you really have winter in the Napa Valley, but
yeah, it gets quite cold here. It can get into the high 30s Fahrenheit and commonly in the 40s in the wintertime. I do it all year round. I also wear the same uniform every day, which is a black t-shirt and black shorts. And so the point of mentioning that is that I'm also exposing myself, and I travel all over the world all throughout the year. It gets quite cold, particularly in Central Europe in the wintertime. So, I'm also exposing myself to quite cold temperatures just in the lack of clothing that I wear throughout the winter. And I also will occasionally do, I occasionally do ice baths or cold lake plunges, or I will occasionally do long, cold exposed runs where I'll only have on a pair of running shoes and a pair of running shorts in very cold weather. So otherwise shirtless and without any kind of coverage. So I'm constantly finding ways to be challenged by cold.
Yeah, well, so you're coming to New York on the weekend and you're just going to come in your shorts and t-shirt?
I will. I'll occasionally wear a vest or some outerwear on the top if the weather is if the weather is pretty extreme, but I never deviate from the standard uniform. This also makes my travel life very simple, and again removes another decision. So the fact that I don't eat during the daytime and I never have to think about what I'm going to wear, or what I look like in it. I never look in the mirror to see if I look okay today because I know exactly what I look like today, right? So it's been pretty empowering. I'm looking for every opportunity to remove decision fatigue at any place that I can remove it.
I think our listeners are getting a bit of a sense about how disciplined you are around these areas as well. And just so everyone knows, you don't have to start off quite as disciplined as that. And but hats off to you. It's amazing. But what amazes me is the way that you bring that into your company. And it seems that you have a big focus on your people, your staff, or I should say your family, and that's who you sort of refer them to. Can you explain a bit about, I guess, why you have that importance of the staff, and then also what you do with your company culture? What does it look like, including what time you start and what you do when you start at work at Dry Farm?
Right. So we don't meet. We have virtually no rules. I think rules are made for people who can't make good judgments. Right. So the only rule we have is that Monday through Friday we meet at 10 a.m. Now, we start at 10 a.m., which is a late start by professional standards, because I want everyone to have a protected morning and to practice their own personal rituals and fitness and have plenty of time to do that in a peaceful way before they meet with us. So we meet at 10, and then from 10 to 11, we meditate together. This is every single day, and there'll be a leader to that meditation. So we meditate, and then we have a number of other practices that we incorporate into the meditation session, including affirmations, visualizations, and what we call gratitude therapy. And the gratitude therapy is that each person around the circle, and will range depending upon who's in town, and we all travel quite often. So the circle will be anywhere from 15 to 25 people. And if it's a full circle, there'll be 25 people sitting there. And what we call the circle of love. And so in the gratitude therapy, each person goes around the circle for 1 to 2 minutes talking about what they are grateful for that day. And that gratitude oftentimes involves some lesson they might want to impart, that they're grateful to share a lesson of, X, Y, and Z. So it might include a lesson. It may just be something they're grateful for that day, or, it's typically just different things for different people. This is super, super important because it makes people vulnerable. It teaches them to be available, emotionally available, right? And so when we're emotionally available, that's when we bond. That's when people trust us. That's when people love us. That's when people see us for who we are instead of the mask that we might be wearing, right? So I want everybody to be seen. I want them to see me, and I want them to see each other, right? And this is super, super, and super impactful on their self-development and their sense of self. And of course, teaching them to meditate. And most of them have meditation practices that they do also at home, as do I. And so it's not just this practice. So anyway, it's just, we teach a lot. We manage our business from a manifesto we call the Peace and Profit Manifesto. We believe that a peaceful life will generate abundant profits, and that an unpeaceful life creates blockage that blocks profits. And so how that works is that when we're operating at our most peaceful sense of presence and self-awareness, when we're peaceful, we are vibrating at a much higher vibration. And those vibrations create frequencies. And those frequencies are mirrored in the universe through the law of attraction. And so when we are vibrating at a very high level and we're feeling our best and self-aware and at peace, we have our highest vibration. This is a reason that, when you live in New York and when you're on Fifth Avenue and there's this harried sense of people and there's a lot of anxiety and you can feel it. Now, that's a very different vibration than you get when you're in Central Park, right? And so when we're in nature, we're vibrating at a much higher frequency. Same thing in an airport. So when we're in an airport, we can feel that lower level of vibration, those lower frequencies, particularly if we're sensitive to it, right? And so that's what meditation does, is free us to be peaceful. And when we are at peace, we're vibrating at a much higher level. And those higher vibrations create more powerful and higher frequencies that we cast out into the mirror that is the universe, that then mirrors back to us in the law of attraction. Does that make sense?
And I imagine you've got a fairly good retention rate too with your staff.
Yeah, virtually no turnover. It's not, our people are well paid. They also get unlimited paid time off. We have, we just don't have any rules. What we do is we try to teach people how to think about what we call self-directed responsibility. So if I need to make a bunch of rules for you or tell you how to behave, you don't have the judgment skills that you need in order to sustain and thrive in our environment. I want to teach you how to make good judgments. Rules are made for people who can't make good judgments, right? And so I want you to think about how to govern yourself. And when you think about, we have unlimited paid time off, we have unlimited expense policy, And when I ask you to think about expenses, what I want you to do is ask yourself, is this respectful of myself? Is this respectful of my other coworkers? And is this respectful of the organization? If the answer to that is yes, feel free to submit it, right? And so the same thing for taking paid time off, right? Which, there's studies out there that show that when companies offer unlimited paid time off, that people don't take it. Well, that's certainly not the case at our organization, right? They take it, and abundantly, but not irresponsibly. If I need to talk with you about taking too much time off, you're not making good judgments. So we apply the same standard. Is the amount of paid time off that you're taking, is it showing self-respect? Are you respecting yourself with these requests? Are you respecting your co-creators around you? And are you respecting the organization? If you can answer yes to that, then I think you'll be able to guide yourself.
And how important is it to you to work with healthy and fit people?
Well, it's just who we are. It is how we live. So as a result, most people who have applied and come to create with us and come to share our purpose, most of those people learn about us through some related health channel. They're either a customer or they're a friend or they met us at a conference, or like we're the official healthy wine for 170 health and performance conferences across the U.S., or they're on our email list where we occasionally promote job openings. So most people everybody, our job postings are also, which you can see at dryfarmwines.com/family. Our job postings are 12 pages long. And so in that 12 pages, it describes all of our practices, how we see the world. Our Peace and Profit Manifesto is there. It describes our very unusual look at the world. And so before someone even applies, they already know who we are. They know we're biohackers. They know we meditate every day. They know the lens in which we see the world.
Absolutely.
And so they're only going to be that they're self-selecting. Anybody who thinks we're crazy, and some people probably do, right? Anybody who thinks we're crazy or doesn't think that our practices are healthy or would be suited for them, they just don't apply. So most people who apply are just like, oh my God, when I read this, I was just like, it spoke directly to me. It was like, this is where I'm meant to be.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I know you've seen it, and I think you have a friend who's applying. And so, it's, the people who do apply, who select in, those people are very compelled by what they read. It speaks directly to them and their values.
Absolutely. Now I've got to get into some wine talk here. I've got to ask you, is it true that wines can contain over 76 additives without them even being listed on the bottle?
Well, this is one of the dirty, dark secrets of the wine industry. So in the United States, the FDA approves 76 additives that can and are used in winemaking. Now, the reason you and your listeners don't know about these additives is because the wine industry has spent tens of millions of dollars in lobby money with Washington, D.C. politicians to keep contents labeling off of wine. It's not an accident that wine is the only major food product without a contents label. And, I might add, zero nutritional information, which would include carbs and sugar. As being on a ketogenic diet and just generally my feeling about sugar as a dangerous neurotoxin is that I don't want to drink sugar in my wine. It's very common to have sugar in wine. And the only way to know whether wine has sugar in it or not is to lab test it, which is the reason that Dry Farm Wines lab test every single wine that we sell. Not only are we looking for sugar, we're looking for a whole lot of other things like alcohol. Another secret of the wine industry is that the alcohol stated on a bottle of wine is not required by law to be accurate. So most people in general are not even looking for the amount of alcohol in wine, and they should be, because coming from the wine guy, it might surprise you to learn to hear me say that alcohol is a very dangerous neurotoxin, a very dangerous drug that ruins lots of people's lives. It also can be very unhealthy, particularly for brain health and also for liver health. And so alcohol needs to be monitored and understood, and our relationship with alcohol needs to be monitored and understood. And we need to be aware of our relationship with alcohol. Alcohol is addictive and very dangerous, which is why we only drink and sell lower alcohol wines. So we sell and drink wines between 6% and 12.5%. Most of the wines I drink are between 10 and 11.5% alcohol. Now, standard American wines, conventional wines you see in your grocery store today, average almost 15% in alcohol. That's what's on the bottle. Now, it can be as much as 1.5% higher. If it's 14%, it can be 15.5% and still be legal, which is why we also test for alcohol. So we don't take anything. We don't take any representation from anybody about what's in the bottle, right? We do independent lab testing on it. I think alcohol, when we talk about natural wines are additive free. They're farmed organically or biodynamically. And biodynamic farming is a prescriptive form of organic farming, an advanced prescriptive method. They are fermented with wild native yeasts that are indigenous to the vineyard where the grapes are grown. Conventional wines are fermented with genetically modified commercial yeast that's grown in a lab. Now, there's 3 reasons why winemakers who make conventional wines use these lab-grown, genetically modified yeast. Number 1, they're sturdier. They're more sturdy and more robust than a wild yeast, and so they're easier to work with. And you can make wine in great quantities with them. You can't do that with a native yeast. Number 2, they'll withstand a high alcohol environment. Native yeast will not withstand a high alcohol environment. The alcohol will kill the yeast. And number 3, they've been modified to have various flavor profiles. As an example, let's say you're growing some grapes in Central California, and you want to make a wine that tastes like it's from Italy. Well, they have a yeast for that, right? So those are the 3 reasons why these genetically modified commercial lab-grown yeast are being used to ferment wine. All natural wines are fermented with wild native yeast that's on the skin of every grape in the world, right? It's right there. Everything needed for making wine is already in the vineyard, right? As we like to say, wines are grown, not made. And so natural wines are additive free, but the point of mentioning kind of what a natural wine is, and in our case, it's also unirrigated, so it's dry farmed, and that's really important for a whole lot of reasons. But aside from the fact that these are like natural, additive free, soulful, real, honest wines, I think the other really, really important thing to think about is our relationship with alcohol. And this is as important as getting rid of the additives. We've got to lower our inherent use of alcohol. Alcohol is, and red wine in particular, has known health benefits in moderate doses. The problem is when the alcohol level gets too high, or we drink too much of these high alcohol products, then we're not any longer having a healthy outcome. We're having an unhealthy outcome. So if you're like me, you're not going to sit down and have a glass of wine. I'm going to have several. If that's the case, I need and want to be drinking a lower alcohol wine, so I'm having a more moderate impact on my brain health. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, there's so many things I want to just sort of go back to that you touched upon. And I definitely want to talk about the health of wine. But before we do that, can you clarify a few terms that you mentioned, dry farmed, and then also organic and biodynamic, and what they all mean, but also how can we believe if there can be labels without all of these additives? Surely there could be labels that say organic or say biodynamic, but actually aren't.
Well, that's pretty regulated. So if a wine says it's organic, then it, by law, they would require certification. But let me stop there, because this is a really, really important point, particularly when you see wines at Whole Foods. Just because a wine is organic or biodynamic, and I'll tell you the difference, just because it's organically or biodynamically grown does not mean that it's natural. It does not mean it was fermented with wild yeast, and it does not mean it's additive free. It just means that the grapes were organically farmed. So this is all very confusing to consumers. So just because a wine is labeled organic doesn't mean it's natural. That being said, the difference between organic and biodynamic: organic is chemical-free farming, right? I think everybody knows what organic is. Biodynamic is a prescriptive form of organic farming. So all biodynamic farming is organic, and then it includes a prescriptive method above just being organic. And those prescriptive methods, which you can research online, were developed in 1925 by an Austrian scientist named Rudolf Steiner. But they include natural preparations that are sprayed on the vines, 100% natural, all made from things in the earth. And the mixtures are actually hand created by the wine grower. One is a quartz mixture, as an example, crushed up quartz in water. And so there are several prescriptions that can be applied to the vines that are 100% natural from the vineyard. And then number two, the second most important distinction is that vine maintenance and harvest are scheduled on lunar cycles, particularly harvest. So their harvesting is set around moon cycles. So those are the primary prescriptions that constitute biodynamic, but you can read about it online.
And sorry to interrupt, do they have to be hand harvest like your wines? Yes,
all biodynamic. I would venture to say that all biodynamic wines are hand harvested. If I don't know, we can't say definitively that biodynamic wines taste better or not. We believe that they generally do, but I'm not sure if that's from the biodynamic farming or harvest cycles. One of the things we believe is, if any farmer who is going to go to the terrific amount of extra effort to farm biodynamically is already so fanatical, about the quality of their fruit, and so fanatical about their farming practices, that they're just probably growing better fruit anyway, right? Mm-hmm. And when I say growing fruit, I mean the taste of what's in the bottle for an additive-free product, particularly, and especially for a lower alcohol product, the taste of what's in the bottle, 97% of that is completely dictated by the quality of the fruit. Nearly 100%, because there's nothing in it but fermented grape juice. And the quality of the berry and the quality of the fruit juice that you begin with will dictate the quality of the wine when it finishes fermenting, because that's all that happens. It comes directly in from the vineyard and it goes through fermentation, and that's it. That is natural wine, and it's fermented with the yeast that's already on the skin of the grape, right? So it requires nothing to make it. It's a grown natural product. The other thing is interesting as alcoholic beverages go, that's very unique about wine is the only alcoholic beverage where, I should say nearly. You can make a case for some very obscure alcohol beverages, perhaps like mead or something. But generally speaking, for the standard alcoholic offerings, wine is the only one where the farmer is growing the wine and producing it and bottling it, right? It's all done by one person, right? And so that's not the case with beer where you're buying hops from a farm or whatever. It's not the case with spirits. This is the case where this farmer, this family farm, grows this wine, and then puts it in a bottle. It's all done by one family, or in many cases by one person, right? And so that person, their ethos, their energy, their love, and I want to talk about this love in farming for a moment because I use this really beautiful example. This love that goes in the bottle, this thing, it is a living part of this farm and this farmer, the place and the people. It's a living thing. The other things, because natural wines don't contain sterilizing doses of sulfur dioxide, which all conventional wines do, that kills the wine and kind of mummifies it and McDonaldizes it and creates this shelf kind of stable product that every bottle tastes the same. As you know from drinking our wines, they taste more soulful, right? They have depth and soul to them. That's the fingerprint. That's the signature of the farm and the farmer. But when I say love in farming, I think of it this way, and you'll appreciate this. When you go to the farmer's market, right, and you see organic vegetables, and they're just like teeming with vibrancy, and the fiber is just like the cabbage or the celery is just so big and green and lush. And you see these vegetables at the farmer's market, and you want to take a photograph of them. They're so vibrant. Well, when you go to the Whole Foods and you also see organic vegetables, they don't look like that, right? And so the same thing is true for a family farm that grows wine, this small family farm where there's love in the farm and love in the practice of farming. That's when you get this really spectacular outcome in the grapeberry. Well, the same thing is true in vegetables. We go to Whole Foods, it's organic, but it's what I call an industrialized organic, right? It's like big farm organic, and that's very different. You know what I'm talking about, the look of those vegetables at the farmer's market, right?
Absolutely. And obviously travel's got a bit to do with this.
Well, yeah, of course. And then when it's harvested, because it's got to travel. So all of these factors contribute to, at the end of the day, the quality of the growing and the quality of the taste, right? That's the reason that these natural wines, and you drink them, you're a member of ours. I mean, they taste better and different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that I normally have 2 glasses of wine and I'm done, but I can actually have 2 glasses of wine and I feel good, and the next day I don't get a hangover.
Right. Our wines are generally hangover free. You have to drink an awful lot of it. I mean, bottles, not just glasses. But generally people report that they get no hangover. And, we get up and meditate every morning. So it's really important. I don't get up with a hangover. I do drink wine every night, except when I'm fasting, except when I'm doing extended multi-day fast. I don't drink during those times. And
so the other unique, I guess, things would be the lack of carbs and sugar and sulfites, I guess.
Yeah. So again, they're additive free. So all wines, whether or not they're natural or not, all wines contain sulfites. Sulfites are naturally occurring during the fermentation process. All fermented foods have sulfites in them. Many foods have sulfites, much higher levels than wine. But what's happening is the added sulfur dioxide at bottling. So for a conventional wine, there are 3 opportunities that sulfur dioxide gets into the wine, is added to the wine by the winemaker, right? The first instance is when he kills the native yeast. So that's the very first thing that a conventional winemaker does, is introduces sulfur dioxide to the wine to kill the native yeast, the one that we talked about earlier that natural farmers use for fermentation. But conventional winemaker needs to kill that so he can then inoculate with the genetically modified lab yeast, right? He's got to kill the native yeast. So that's the first use of sulfur dioxide. The second use of sulfur dioxide for commercial wines is to stop the fermentation process. In other words, to kill the lab-grown yeast. So before fermentation completes, leaving residual sugar behind in wine, that's how sugar gets in wine. Sugar is never added to wine. Sugar gets in wine because the winemaker stops the fermentation process before the fermentation completes. And let me explain to you what that means. So how a wine becomes sugar-free is that the winemaker allows for a full and complete fermentation. So here's how winemaking works. The yeast, when it activates at a certain temperature, when the yeast activates, the yeast will eat the available sugar. And in that process, like a little Pac-Man, the yeast is just eating up the sugar. That's the food for the yeast. When the yeast eats the sugar, the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. That's how wine is made. Now, if the fermentation process is allowed to complete, then the yeast will eat all of the available sugar, and then the yeast will die from lack of food source. That is a fully fermented sugar-free wine. But what's happening with conventional wines is that the winemaker dumps in sulfur dioxide to kill that yeast before it completes the fermentation, leaving some residual sugar behind. Now, why do they do that? Americans love sugar. Well, sugar is a global problem. And also, sugar and sugar byproducts add mouthfeel and these long finishes that you'll notice you don't get with our wines because they don't have any of these sugar and sugar byproducts in them. You know, people reverend this caramelly long finish. Well, that's sugar and sugar byproducts because sugar-free natural wine doesn't do that. There is no long finish, right? And so this is the reason that they kill the yeast before it completes fermentation, leaving residual sugar, or RS as it's known in the industry, in the wine. That's how sugar gets in wine, and that's how our wines are sugar-free. So that's sort of the winemaking process that gets you to a sugar or not sugar-free wine.
That's really interesting. And I'd love you to be able to describe what's dry farmed mean?
Well, dry farm is very simply the lack of irrigation. So in the United States, more than 99% of all U.S. vineyards are irrigated, meaning they have a drip hose just above the trunk of the vine, and they are fed liquid nitrogen, fertilizer, or just plain water. They're irrigated. Now, irrigation is largely, not completely, but largely an American idea. And you irrigate for two reasons: money and greed. And so I'll tell you why. Grapevines have been living all over the world in very, very difficult environments, very hot places, for over 10,000 years without irrigation. Irrigation didn't come to the United States in grape farming until the early 1970s. Prior to that, everything in the United States was also unirrigated. Now, here's why you irrigate a grapevine. You get higher yields and fruit that weighs more. Fruit sold by the ton. If the berry is filled with water, it weighs significantly more, and you get significantly higher yield. It produces more berries, and they weigh more. So that's really, and also dry farming is a considerably more work. It's more effort. It produces lower yields and fruit that weighs less. But the fruit that it does produce is higher in the next thing we're going to talk about, which is polyphenols. So all of the polyphenols, flavonoids, and antioxidants that are present in wine, 4 times more in red than white. We'll talk about this in a moment. But all of these polyphenols are also diluted by water. So an irrigated grape berry is also less healthy for you. We're going to talk about the health aspects in a moment. So an irrigated grapevine just produces a much, much lower quality of fruit. Not only is it diluted by water, but the root ball is about 3 feet, 2.5 to 3 feet wide, and about 2.5 or 3 feet deep. That's an irrigated grapevine root structure because it gets all of its nutrient and all of its water from the surface right above the trunk. An unirrigated grapevine at maturity can have a root structure that can be 50 feet deep. And that root structure is growing all the time, these little hair-like capillaries that are just struggling their way through the earth in search for moisture and nutrient, which is why unirrigated grapeberries produce a much, much higher quality of fruit and consequently a much higher quality of wine than irrigated vines. So that's what dry farming is, and some of its impact.
And so, if they were irrigated, would that make it easier to add the Roundup?
Well, it's just an article that came out on CBS News this week, and it's been pushed around on social media about beer and wine and glyphosate being found in organic and non-organic wines, and the further speculation about how it's getting there. And so in this article, and there have been previous studies done on the same topic for American wines showing glyphosate present in almost all wines on organic and non-organic farms, right? And so it's speculated that that it is getting introduced to the vine through irrigation. The way Roundup is applied, I might add, Roundup is the number one used herbicide in U.S. vineyards. I'd also mention, by the way, we don't sell any U.S. wines. No, there are no domestic wines that are produced that meet our strict standards of health and purity. They're all very small family farms in Europe, and then I have 4 farmers in South Africa. And so it's speculated when you apply Roundup or glyphosate to a vineyard, it's not the way it's applied to wheat. It's not surprising that it's found in beer, in organic and non-organic, because typically glyphosate is applied from the air in a wheat field from a crop plane, from a plane that flies overhead. And so overspray into neighboring organic farms is a very common problem for wheat farming, very common problem, because you've got this overspray through the wind. That's not how glyphosate is applied in a vineyard. In a vineyard, it's very close to the ground, super close to the ground. And so this opportunity for overspray is not really present in the way we would think of it from overspray from a plane. And so this concept that there would be enough overspray or enough blowing of the glyphosate into a neighboring organic farm is just not very realistic. So it's speculated in the article that came out this week, the study that came out this week, and the previous study that came out 2 years ago, is speculated that it's getting to the vine through irrigation, so that the groundwater, the irrigation water, may be contaminated just from so much use in neighboring farms. So because our wines are not irrigated, we believe that they're much more likely to be protected against glyphosate contamination.
Great. That's excellent. I really appreciate that explanation too. So one last question before we get on to the health of wine. How do we, and I guess this relates to health, how do we know if it says organic, or even better, if it says biodynamic, we know it's organic? If it says that on the bottle, how do we know that it is? Because I know with food, there are certain certificates like, it's certified organic, which actually means that it is. What's your take on that, like language?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is whether it's organic doesn't mean it's naturally made. So this is a big important distinction. You've got farming practices, and then you have winemaking practices. So
exactly.
even if it's organic, it doesn't mean that it's healthy or pure. It just means it was grown with organic fruit. But by law in the United States, if it says organic on the bottle, it must be certified organic by law. And there's pretty strict enforcement around that topic. So if it says organic, you're probably drinking organic grapes, but probably not natural wine.
So the bottom line is that we're actually looking for the label of biodynamic.
Well, no, you're looking for natural wines. The problem is that it's not going to say natural wine on the label in most cases, right? Because there's no international standard where there is an understanding for what natural wine is, but there's no certification body around it. And so the only way you're going to know if you're drinking natural wines that have been lab tested and meet our criteria is buy them from us. But I'm not. If you want to find natural wines in your market in New York, as an example, it's quite easy. There are a number of retail shops that have natural wine sections. You can find that by doing a natural wine search on the internet, or you can download a smartphone app called Raisin. That's a map-based app that will show you where nearby natural wine restaurants, bars, and retailers are in major cities, right? My favorite natural wine bar in New York is in the Lower East Village. Is called 10 Bells. There's about a dozen natural wine bars and about a dozen natural wine retailers in the New York area. But if you don't live in San Francisco,
can't anyone just call their wine natural wine? I mean, you see the food labels, natural jelly beans, like
they could, but it's just not really done. I mean, there's a certain ethic pride in the natural wine community. It's just they could, but it just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. If natural wine drinkers and aficionados and professionals like us are just sort of fanatical about it. I mean, it's not, they just refuse to drink anything else. I mean, they're just like, it's sort of a cult. It's very cultish. And so there's nobody out there saying, I've never encountered any natural wine bar. I've never encountered any natural wine list or restaurant or retailer who represented to be natural wines that weren't natural. I know what you're saying, but this kind of cult thing in this part of the wine business, it just doesn't happen. I've never seen it.
That's great to hear. So basically what you're saying is US wines, given that 99% of them aren't dry farmed, would not say natural wine.
Well, some natural wines can be irrigated. We don't sell any. So you can irrigate a wine. It can still be considered natural, but it's not dry farmed and it's not a wine we would sell. But there are some natural wines that are irrigated. There are some natural wines made in the United States. We don't sell them or drink them because they don't meet our criteria. And among the criteria they don't meet is that they're irrigated. Mm. And so all this is very confusing.
No, I think you've made it really clear. So tell me about the health benefits of wine, because there's so much sort of marketing around resveratrol, and it's healthy for the heart, and then the antioxidants help prevent artery disease and that sort of thing. What's the truth around?
Well, the truth is that there's a whole lot of red herring and misinformation, particularly about resveratrol. And let's talk about that. This has been just a marketing boon for the wine industry that's largely a lot of BS. And here's why. And look, I'm in the business of selling wine, but more importantly, I'm in the business of telling you the truth, right? About alcohol, the truth about wine. And our business, as you mentioned in your introduction, our business has grown 675x in revenue in 3 years. And that happened because we tell the truth, and what we represent and the quality of our product is real, and our representations are real. So we don't need to do anything to sell more wine. So here's the deal on resveratrol. Well, let's back it up before we get to resveratrol. Let's talk about again a little bit of grape science and winemaking. So here's how you make wine. We've already talked about, you introduced yeast to the juice and how the fermentation practice works. But let's talk about the difference between red wine and white wine. So if you squeeze the juice from a red wine grape and you squeeze the juice from a white wine grape, they are both clear. How red wine gets its color and its tannin structure and its increase in polyphenols is from contact with the skin. So when you make a red wine, you press the juice off, and then you add the skins and seeds into the tank with the clear juice, and that's how it gets its color through a maceration process. It's typically anywhere from 5 to 15 days that the skin contact and the juice will be together, right? And so that's how red wine gets its color. That's also how it gets its tannin structure, and that's also how it gets an increase in the polyphenols, flavonoids, and antioxidants. White wine has just over 200 polyphenols. Red wine has almost 900 different types of polyphenols, including in red wine, the most famous one, which is resveratrol. Now, here's the reason the resveratrol promotion is inauthentic and untruthful. There's no human proof, there's no evidence that resveratrol has any impact on lifespan for humans. Zero. There is, however, some evidence that it will extend lifespan in mice, right? All right, so this is a really, really important distinction. In the mice study, the dosage of resveratrol required to show this benefit was extraordinarily high, and you would never achieve this level of dose from drinking red wine unless you were drinking a swimming pool a week, right? And so this concept that resveratrol was somehow this anti-aging drug is just not accurate. Now, here's what we do know. In all of the blue zones, which is where the 5 blue zones where we find the highest number of centarians and supercentarians. Supercentarians are anybody over 105. Centarians are over 100. Most people who become centarians don't make it to 105, right? And so the highest concentration of centarians and supercentarians around the world, in all of the blue zones but one, red wine is a regular staple of their diet, right? And so there's certainly anecdotal evidence to suggest that drinking red wine is healthy for the aging process. But when we talk about science and conclusive evidence, it's just not there, right? There is anecdotal evidence, but not scientific evidence. That being said, I'm drinking a few glasses of red wine every night, and I recommend that you do too.
Excellent. But you did mention also that the red wine is much more potent with antioxidants. So would you therefore be drinking just red wine, or do you drink a bit of white?
I only drink red wine because I'm just a red wine drinker. I just prefer to drink red wine. So for me, it's just the only wine I drink. I occasionally taste white wines. I occasionally taste rosés. I occasionally taste sparkling wines just because I'm around them all the time. And sometimes they'll be really compelling and interesting. And I just like to have the experience of something that's compelling and interesting. But generally speaking, I'm just a red wine drinker. And I also drink really low alcohol red wines. I prefer to drink between 9 and 11%. I prefer the taste of it. And I don't like alcohol. Like alcohol in very low doses is an amazing drug that has some real inherent psychological benefits. But alcohol as a drug in general, I just don't enjoy the experience. I do in very low doses. In very low doses, which is why I drink low alcohol wines, in very low doses, we get an enhancement of creative expression. We become more emotionally available. That window of vulnerability gets rolled down just a little bit, and we make ourselves seen. And for us, this is around the dinner table and beautiful conversations and where love is created. Any wine, but low doses of alcohol, which are my preferred method of gaining access to that is through wine, because there's just something really spiritual about wine that I don't find in other alcohol. So when we can create more love and open our heart and become just a little bit more available, be seen and be more vulnerable, this is when the human experience shows itself in the most beautiful way possible, right? And so wine is just super healthy with that. And that's the reason. That's another reason I drink wine. I drink wine with other people, because once we're seen, we just connect. It's just more loving. And if we can create more love in our life, we need to take every opportunity possible to do that. That's what we need the most.
On that note, I'm going to go and pour myself a glass, I think. I think you've sold me. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, I just think I think that for the male listeners, rip off that mask of masculinity and find your true self. And for everybody, dedicate yourself to a meditation practice.
Awesome.
And share more love with people. Be more empathetic. Know that everybody you come in contact with is suffering from some kind of tragedy or drama you know nothing about, right? And just lower the judgment down and just try to be more empathetic and love more. And meditation is super helpful with that.
Thank you, Todd. And look, Todd, I've got to ask you a bit of a personal question, something we ask all the guests on the show. Do you have a tattoo?
I do not. I am inkless.
You are what?
I'm probably one of the few people I know without a tattoo.
Yeah. Have you ever considered or?
It's funny. I have considered it just recently. So, Dry Farm Wines, as you know, has these antlers as a part of its logo. I've considered getting the antlers put on my right bicep, actually, but I haven't done it yet. But I've thought about it. It's just that the organization and the wine and the movement and the revolution that we've created is so important to me. I just thought about kind of getting marked in that way permanently, but I haven't yet. I also want to mention for your listeners, we have a special offer that we like to give podcast listeners. It's a 1 penny bottle of wine, and they can find that in your show notes, and they can also find it online at dryfarmwines.com/Alley Fitness. That's dryfarmwines.com/Alley Fitness for a penny bottle of wine.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I will put that in the show notes. That's great. And next time I see you, I expect you'll have something on your right bicep.
It's possible. It's certainly possible. I'll look forward to seeing you. Are you going in any health conferences? Are you going to Paleo FX?
Yes.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
We'll see you there. We'll have about 20 people with us. We're going to throw down a big party at Paleo FX.
Great. Look, thank you so much again, and look forward to seeing you.
You as well. Thanks for having me on the show today. It was a great time.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.alley.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.